We're really happy to welcome the leaders of CARLA's initiative on equity and access to seals of bilingualism, Kendall King and Ayumi Stockman. Kendall is a professor of multilingual education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction here at the University of Minnesota. And Ayumi is the World Languages Education Specialist at the Minnesota Department of Education. And they are joined by T. Wen, who is a PhD student in the Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development here at the University of Minnesota. And T was the research assistant for this project in summer of 2023. And the title of their talk today is Equity and Access to Minnesota Bilingual Seals. Welcome, Kendall, Ayumi, and T.
Thank you. For Kate having us and everybody for joining us for the presentation today. My name is Ayumi, again, World Languages Specialist at the Minnesota Department of Education. I'm gonna provide some context of the presentation today. And then Kendall is going to talk about the findings from the needs analysis, and then the grant that we received from Title VI through CARLA. And then T, towards the end, we'll talk about the deliverables and then toolkit we were able to produce through this project, Equity and Access to the Minnesota Bilingual Seals project. And at the end, we will talk about the next steps for us, and then question and then answers. So in terms of the context of the Minnesota Bilingual Seals, you probably are familiar with the Seal of Biliteracy. That is the term known outside of Minnesota. And in Minnesota, it is known as the Minnesota Bilingual Seals. As you can see on this map here, the gray, darker shaded states have the Seal of Biliteracy program. Pretty much same thing across the board. And then there are 49 states have adopted so far. And we are hoping that pretty soon, all 50 states have that similar same program to honor the linguistic skills other than English. So originally it's started in California. It was legislated in 2011. In Minnesota, originally it was legislated in 2014 as a part of the LEAPS Act, English, Learning English for Academic Proficiency and Success Act. And it was a part of the provisions of situating multilingualism and multiculturalism as an asset. So it was legislated in Minnesota, but there was no designated state level funding. And then lots of schools are kind of left on their own to figure out how to implement the Minnesota Bilingual Seals. So a little bit more about the Minnesota Bilingual Seals here. We have 3 levels of awards, and ACTFO's intermediate low level is called World Language Proficiency Certificate. And the intermediate high level is the Gold Seal, and then advanced low is the Platinum Seal. So Minnesota is kind of unique because we have 3 levels of awards, and then lots of other states have only just 1 level of award. And the level also different between the states as well. And another thing that is unique, and as a Minnesota, we can be proud of, is that bilingual seals and the World Language Proficiency certificates are also tied to college credit at the Minnesota State Colleges Universities. And then, so those are number of semesters credit that students can earn. So again, it is legislated in a statute, but there's no funding associated to it. And then I, as a Minnesota, at the Department of Education, I'm able to provide technical support. But what we've been seeing is that often many school districts may not have the designated person who coordinate that effort. So particularly in those areas that we are seeing a gap, which we will look at in next slides, that many school districts are having a very difficult time to even start up and learn about the program and then get that going. So we're gonna look at some data here. So this is from 2021. So again, I said there are 3 levels of awards. So the blue shaded one is the World Language Proficiency Certificate exact for the intermediate level. So this is about 1,146 certificate awardees. And then a gold seal is the yellow part. There were 661 awardees. And then platinum seal is advanced law. So it was about less than 300 students. So this is a kind of a typical breakdown that we see in terms of the number of awardees and then what kind of awards the students are receiving. So this slide shows percentage of awardees who are classified as English learners. And then this is not really the perfect the way to kind of numbers that we have, because it is schools are basically reporting as English language learners. And the reporting is done in kind of a manual way. We do not have the electronic system quite in place yet. But the number of awardees usually hovers around 2,000. And then we don't have the students' demographic information, such as the relationship to the language of the awardees, whether it is the world languages that they're learning, whether the languages that they speak as a heritage language or the home language. So that one way to look at it is the English language learners number, and it's about 10% of students who are earning the awards are reported as English learners. It's not the perfect way, but it still kind of gives us an indication. Here's another way to look at the awards, awardees. And we have about, each year, we have about 2,000 students earning awards. In the 19 and 20, that was the year that pandemic hit and school shut down that spring. So we saw some significant dip in that year. But then after that, we also came back to almost near close to the pre-pandemic time. And I'm seeing that every year new schools are coming on board. So I hope that this number will continue to grow. So we have about 58,000 high school students graduate. And then, so we have about 2,000 students earning the award. So that is about only like 3% of the entire students who are entire graduating students who are earning the award. And then also that this is a number of, statewide. Okay, sorry, now I'm going to the next. So this is a number of participating school district, and of course it is increasing. 2021 data, that most recent data we have, there were 55 traditional public schools participated, and then we had 5 charter schools, and then we had 5 private schools participating in this. And then, so this is about 7. So it is about like 17% of the 355 traditional public schools are participating in the program. So the other way to look at it is that 80% of traditional public schools are not participating in a bilingual seals program. So you can see that there are some gaps in terms of who is the program being implemented, and then students being able to access to the college credit bearing award. So here's another information about the languages that are being awarded. The Spanish is the number 1 languages that students are earning the award. And then we have other languages listed there, such as French, Hmong, and Karen, and Somali. The assessments are available in Minnesota in 29 languages, including Ojibwe, Dakota, Oromo, Karen, Amharic, and then American Sign Language. And however, that you can see the Spanish is the majority of the awardees. And we also have the more linguistic diversity, particularly like Hmong and Karen and Somali. But then the number of awardees are pretty proportionately not really similar to the populations that we have. So this is another data looking at geographically where the bilingual seals are being awarded. So you can see suburban schools. So this is so these awards there are 2,200 awardees total, and then almost 1,700 students were found in a suburban school district. And then the most linguistic diversities are found in the urban area. So then there are some significant gap. When the SEALS program started, when MDE started to be able to collect the data, the urban school district were actually had almost 50%, about half of the entire awardees. But then the suburban school district was catching up, and then they kind of surpassed it at this time. And then for the rural areas, you can see that it's very little students are being awarded. So when you look at this age 10 to 19 years old population, so the suburban area, there are 50% of the students live in a suburban area, and 36% of the students live in a rural area, and 14% live in urban area. But then the total certificate and seals being awarded, 76% of the awardees are found in a suburban area. And then 4% is rural area. So that is a very big gap. It's not proportionate to the population. The urban area is kind of similar to the proportion, but still in terms of when we look at the language varieties of awardees, I feel like that there's a little more room to grow. All right, so then next, Kendall is going to talk about the needs assessment and then findings, and then talk about our team too.
Great. Thanks, Ayumi. Thanks, everybody, for being here. So as Ayumi laid out, we were aware that there were some really big challenges and areas for growth. To summarize, this was uneven access to language supports, this sort of rural, suburban, urban divide, and kind of the DIY nature of many SEALS programs, or all SEALS programs in many districts. So we joined together and applied for award together with CARLA. And we were very happy, as everyone was at CARLA, to be awarded a multi-year grant from the Department of Education. The overall goal of the grant program for our program within the grant was to increase equity and access to SEALs, in particular for less commonly taught languages and for rural districts and those schools and districts which were really just getting off the ground. So Ayumi and I have partnered on this, and we have been luckily supported by 3 great graduate students and RAs, Andrew Fegan, a PhD student in CNI, Jarana Aziz, also a PhD student in CNI, and Thi Nguyen, who's with us and will be sharing some of her work in a moment. So year 1, which we just completed, was focused on a needs analysis. We already had a sense of the data and a rough plan, but our goal was to make sure that what we built was what was needed. So to do this, we collected data through a Qualtrics survey with roughly 100 Minnesota language and education professionals, both those with programs in place and those without programs. Focus groups with those same individuals. We ran 5 separate focus groups, and a close analysis of district level documents and materials. So I'm just going to give you kind of a big picture overview of these findings. And I will start with what our quantitative findings from the Qualtrics survey showed. Overall, we found that there was wide variation across the districts. There was somewhat of a tale of 3 types of districts. We had many large suburban ones, which kind of function like well-oiled machines with offices and full-time staff in place in some cases to run these programs. Urban districts, which were striving to work with many languages, but often under some constraints, budget and otherwise. and then many rural districts or charter schools with very small world language programs, limited administrative capacity. Sometimes this was one foreign language teacher, world language teacher, who was tasked with starting this up on her own with very little support. Irrespective of the size or type of district, we found that there was a lot of interest, a lot of enthusiasm, and a lot of innovation. Across all of our findings, or all of our participants, we found there was a need, a very vocal need for support, and we kind of put this into three buckets: a need for promoting and explaining the program to potential participants as well as to other people in the district, need for support in selecting and administrating the assessments, and also help in preparing students for the assessments. And this was the case for LICTLs, or students who were studying less commonly taught languages in particular. We found that this is meant to be kind of a wheel here. One of our RAs was like, I didn't know what that is, so I guess I should make it explicit. We found that in many cases, districts felt like, and it seemed that they were kind of having to reinvent the wheel and create these materials again and figure this out somewhat independently. We also had some requests that were just outside of the grant scope that were interesting, but were not, and important, but not feasible. Maybe the most common of those was funding for some sort of program. So just to give you a sense of the qualitative findings and what we found, districts reported that I'll just read it, that by far and large, the kids who are in a language program are completely outpacing kids of less commonly taught languages who don't have access to a language program in a public school. This was from an urban teacher in a very established program, and these findings actually were reiterated by our colleagues in St. Paul, who have an amazing data dashboard that's able to show very clearly with the race equity and LICTL lens how certain students, in particular those in immersion, who've gone through immersion programs and are teaching commonly taught or learning commonly taught languages, are far outpacing heritage language speakers and learners of color in many cases. Many stress the need for materials. For instance, a teacher who was assigned to establish a program just kind of said, walk me through it, have some more handouts and printouts and things like that, things I can take to the world language teachers and our administration and tell us about it. Many participants reported feeling overwhelmed, in particular with making decisions around testing. For instance, a charter school administrator noted that, the Korean teachers, they were deciding, and then there's no resources, they were floundering, they didn't know where to start. They sort of formed a committee, and then we did start. We asked a testing company for materials, and there weren't any, and so it was sort of a dead end. So these are just some of the many comments and needs that were identified in our qualitative analysis and our focus groups. The last thing that we did was a pretty exhaustive analysis of the public-facing materials on websites. We looked at the curricular offerings, what was in the handbooks, promotional web pages, school news, and we were really looking at these with an eye to what was available, who was it targeting, how multilingual was it? And we found that there was a fair amount of variation across districts, but it tended to be pretty limited and sporadic. And in many cases, for instance, just offered a link to the MDE website rather than engaging multilingual materials. So with all of this in mind, we decided, based on our analysis of data and what our colleagues were generous enough to share with us, that our goal was to create adaptable multilingual promotional materials for use both for developing and established programs. We wanted stuff that everybody could use and that was easy to find and easy to use for administrators as well. So technical and administrative guidance in making decisions about which test and how to get started in selecting that test. With the eye to supporting students prepare We wanted to create sample prompts and responses in multiple languages, and also test descriptors, sample language, and links to practice tests, in particular for the lictals where there's a dearth of materials. So with that, I will hand things over to T, who will talk about what we built this summer. Thanks, T.
Thank you so much, Kendall, for sharing the needs analysis and setting up the context. So the website that we created in response to the needs analysis aims to kind of become a one-stop shop for everything Minnesota bilingual SEALs. We've used Google Sites to develop the website. It's a very user-friendly platform, and Canva was our best friend for all graphic design needs. All materials are designed to be all comprehensive, but also visually appealing and easy to follow. And one important thing that we emphasize was equity and inclusion. So as a result, like all content on our site have multilingual versions, and they're organized in ways that respond directly to needs of our target audience members, which are students, educators, and families. So we'll show you some examples in a moment. So first and foremost, I would like to highlight our 14 deliverables, or these are knowledge products and communication tools on our website that can be distributed to expand participation in the Minnesota bilingual SEALs. I'm going to try my best to go through each deliverable as precisely as I can. So for promotional purposes, we have a short 90-second video about the program available in multiple languages. We also offer a quick start guide with step-by-step instructions for administrators to navigate the process of setting up and running the program. We also have a customizable template posters and letters giving a comprehensive overview of the program along with other nice looking supplemental infographics. We got the "Are you ready for the test?" infographic, which helps students get a sense of whether they're ready for the SEALs assessment, and the benefits of biliteracy infographic, which communicates the core benefit of biliteracy. So those are the artifacts to support for promotional purposes. For purposes of educating students on assessment resources, we created a language testing options infographic, which communicates to students and teachers which tests are available in which languages. We also have an overview of test chart, which describe the technical characteristic of tests provided by different testing companies. There is a proficiency level descriptors graphic, which illustrates the corresponding award level to each proficiency level. Practice tests are also available on our site. We offer links to Apple and advanced practice tests in different languages. We also have information on practice tests in other languages as well. There are also sample multilingual test prompts and responses at the intermediate and advanced level, so that students can look at them and use them as models to prepare for their tests. And last but not least, for purposes of preparing administrators to process and manage assessment results, we provide a score to award level conversion infographic, which helps educator interpret student scores across different testing companies and determine the appropriate award levels. We also created a data management template and reflection guidelines that can be used as a reference for record keeping and professional development. So here's the screenshot of a portion of our landing page. And as you can see, we have streamlined our information load in ways that respond to the needs of our students, educators, and families. For students, we focus on resources that help them improve their understanding of the SEALs program and also to prepare for the assessments. For educators, we focus on the knowledge and strategy to implement the SEAL programs at their schools or school districts. And for families, we focus on helping parents and guardians to facilitate their students' language learning. And as I have briefly mentioned, our infographics, templates, posters, and letters are all customizable. You can download them in whichever format that works best with your computer and also your personal preferences. We have them typically available in PDF editable, PDF fillable, and Word. So once you have them in your desired format, you can fill in the information specific to your school or school district and make other changes as needed. Currently, our materials are available in 7 languages: Amharic, Spanish, Hmong, Quran, Oromo, Somali, and Vietnamese. And notably, as you can see here, aside from Spanish, the 6 other languages are not commonly taught in schools. So a huge part of what we're trying to do here is increasing awareness of the SEALs program among communities whose linguistic assets have historically been overlooked in policies and initiatives. So these are the navigation buttons on the homepage that direct you to versions of our website in the 7 languages. So this is where you can see and obtain all of our multilingual materials. It can be very useful if you would like to reach out to students and family who speak less commonly taught languages. And we do believe that the availability of materials in their target language really goes a long way when it comes to making students feel welcomed and uplifted as they embark on their journey with the SEALs program. And here's an example of how our materials has been translated. So they're translated and made available in on multiple multilingual versions on our website. And this promotional template poster right here has been translated to Vietnamese, along with our video and sample test prompts. And on the next slide, you will also see examples of Oromo, Somali, and Hmong versions of our promotional posters. So each knowledge product went through multiple rounds of translation and checking to ensure accuracy from a linguistic, cultural, as well as generational perspective. And we're also looking for feedback on our translations. So if you have time, please feel free to go onto our website at www.minnesotabilingualseals.com. It's up top on the slide. You can navigate your way to our multilingual resources and just give them a quick review. We always look for ways to improve our translations. So any feedback would be greatly appreciated. So I will now pass it back to Yumi for wrapping up.
Or maybe Ayumi and I could do this together. Thanks, T. I want to give T credit. Everybody worked super hard this summer, but T was the design, visual, graphics wizard. So I think things look beautiful, and a lot of that is thanks to her. So as T said, we are looking for feedback. And Ayumi, if you go to the next slide, I'd encourage you as we talk now, we'll open things up for questions in a moment, but feel free to poke around on the site. And in particular, as you see here under our team, if you click there, that will take you to a Google form where any types of feedback are really welcome. We see this as sort of an informal rollout, and we're always updating things. So we welcome and value any type of feedback. Ayumi, if you just want to go to the next slide, I will kind of wrap up and we can open up the floor. So where are we now? We are this fall kind of doing a not so much soft, but a full launch, I guess, of the website. And we'll be continuing to revise and develop materials, hopefully adding some new languages, and also fine-tuning our website. We're also beginning to reach out to our national colleagues and colleagues in other states. We hope and plan to, in the next year, develop a national toolkit that has materials that are adaptable and usable for educational leaders in many states. We're also developing and will be offering a CARLA Summer Institute in 2024. That will be open for registration and application in January. I just want to highlight that this first institute is just for Minnesota educators. We will have a national version in 2025, but 2024 will be focusing on supporting Minnesota professionals in developing their SEALs program. And Ayumi is always active in offering workshops and webinars for her Minnesota colleagues. And she has some before the Fall Summer Institute, and you can see the QR code for registration there. So thank you so much for your attention, and we welcome your feedback. We're happy to take questions as well. And Ayumi, feel free to add anything that I might have missed.
Thanks, Kendall, Ayumi, and T. So far there aren't any questions in the chat, but I do want to mention that Mandy wrote, "This is a comprehensive kit of resources. Congratulations." And from CARLA's standpoint, Karen and I received regular updates on what was going on with the project, and consulted a little bit with Kendall and Ayumi, but we have just been amazed at the output of this project. So congratulations to all of you, including the other members of your team who aren't here today. We've been blown away by how much work you've gotten done, and really excited to see what happens with the national toolkit that you're going to create. I actually do have a question. I can kind of kick things off. So somebody in the chat, when you were presenting your data about the languages that are most represented in the SEALs in Minnesota, mentioned that Mandarin wasn't mentioned. And I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about how you chose the languages that you focused on for the project in Minnesota, because I know you were pretty deliberate about which languages you wanted to translate the materials into, and that might maybe respond a little bit to that comment in the chat about Mandarin not being included.
I can have a stab, and I'm sure Yumi has a lot to say here too. We were concerned with high incidence languages, the languages which were most commonly spoken by heritage language speakers, and those for which there were not a whole lot of formal supports. So I think we landed on those 7 as being the most demographically significant, and at the same time, not a whole lot of formal supports in place. But Ayumi, do you have other things to add? And I think the question about Mandarin was maybe why aren't there more awards as well?
Is that the question was about basically the number of awardees? Is that?
Yeah, the comment came through while you were
Right.
presenting that data about
Right.
the most common languages that are awarded SEALs.
Yeah. Actually, we do have a report going back 17-18 school year that shows breakdown of all the awardees and then languages, and then which awards that students are getting. And it is at the MD's website. And then Mandarin Chinese, there are awardees. But when we made a pie chart thing, maybe it was probably less than. It didn't appear right, Kendall, when you did the pie chart. So we do have more languages being awarded, but the number of students are not quite there yet, perhaps. I believe in generally speaking, in Minnesota, we still have a lot of room to grow, even in the world languages context, and then the heritage languages context too. So.
Yeah. So they are on the chart. The sliver was just 2.
Yeah, I want to put the link. So sorry if I mess up with the screen sharing. Can I stop screen sharing?
Yeah.
Okay.
So while you're looking for the link, Ayumi, I had another question too about early on, you presented some information about the number of students receiving the SEAL who are English language learners. And I wondered if you looked at the proportion of ELs who were, I guess I don't know how to phrase the question, like how many ELs are actually going for the SEAL? Do you have a percentage of that? Is there a way to encourage more ELs to get the SEAL so that their first language is recognized more formally?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Kendall.
I was going to say that the EL slide, it's not perfect data, as Ayumi was suggesting, people always want to know, like, are these world language students or heritage language students, right? And a lot of the motivation driving the SEAL legislation, both in the state and nationally, is about recognizing the skills that heritage language learners bring to the table. That data isn't really tracked, and the EL data is imperfect because even though the number is about 10%, they might be former ELs, right? So they still could be heritage language learners. So the short answer is we don't know exactly how that plays out, world language versus heritage language. I will say St. Paul has amazing data in their data dashboard, and I attended their presentation at MCTLC, and it was quite sobering, actually, how few of the awards were to heritage language learners. So many of the awardees were world language learners doing, French, German, Spanish. So I think the data is probably not going to look great if we were able to do that sort of fine-grained analysis across the state. And you also see that in the suburban, the huge growth, which is awesome, right? That suburban districts are growing, but a lot of that is at the cost and actually decreasing number of SEALs in urban contexts where we know many of our heritage language learners reside.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ayumi.
I was gonna say, looking at is it Pei Wen, Fang? Did I say your name right?
Yes.
Pei? Okay. Looking at your question, comment about the lots of weekend schools are operating. And one of the things I encourage school district to do is to really reaching out the multilingual learners that you didn't know that you had in your schools. Because in a world languages program, as the students are captured through the program, it's visible. There are, let's say, French or there's Spanish program being offered, they are visible, right? And then English learners also, that they have a way to capture easily because they are captured in the program. But then we also have the schools that are operating on the weekends, and then talk about that at the webinar. So, and then at the MDE, I continuously, it's a continuing work to really reaching out to broader public, not just the K-12 systems. So spread the word and working with early childhood divisions as well, because we want to reach out the younger families, particularly with, multilingual families with young children. And then recently I got a phone call from a family whose son or daughter, I don't remember, the child was only 4 years old, who spoke non-English language, and then the parent wanted to make sure that the kid will get that SEAL. So this is a continuing work to educate the general public. So.
Well, and I think this website is going to help a lot with that. So, so there's a question from Kathleen who asks, does Minnesota offer options for student languages to be assessed if they aren't one of the 27 languages available via Minnesota SEAL assessments? So are there ways to assess students who you don't have tests for, essentially, right, in Minnesota?
There's not currently an option for the languages where we do not have assessment that's aligned with Act for the Proficiency Guideline. In that case, I often refer them to the Global Seal of Biliteracy. They accept a whole lot more assessments. And so unfortunately, Minnesota students speak more than 300 languages, but not all languages actually have the assessment that demonstrate the 4 skills. So those are so each state has a different rules and stuff, but Minnesota's bilingual seal is legislated. So the criteria is legislated. The needs for students to take an assessment in all 4 modalities, that is legislated. So currently we do not have that option right now, but we've been working to develop assessment in many of Minnesota's multilingual languages, such as Yusorek, Hmong, Karen, Oromo, Vietnamese. We focused top we looked at the top 12 languages spoken by our Minnesota's multilingual learners. That's how we decided to which language assessment we develop.
There's a little bit of a misnomer that there is a Minnesota SEAL assessment, like that there's one thing run by the state, when in fact there are many test operators who provide assessments in many languages. So that's something that's really confusing for people just starting out developing a program, is to figure out which vendors essentially they need to work with. So the good news is that the number of assessments offered by these companies is always, the number of languages, being assessed by these companies is always increasing. The other good news is you might have seen that Extempore received a grant through Fidelity, and assessments in Minnesota LICTLs for Minnesota students will be free for the next 2 or 3 years, I believe.
2 years.
So
I was just going to ask if there's any, if you have any data about whether or not the seals are cost prohibitive for certain districts. I would guess that the obvious answer is yes. But because I know like actual tests are expensive, and yeah.
And it varies. One of the things varies quite a bit by language as well.
Yeah.
Like Excel is really expensive. So one of the ideas we had was to just make this as clear as possible. I kept on saying, I want like an Amazon sort of spreadsheet, like when you're going to buy a headphone, you can kind of compare and contrast by just looking at one page. And we have something like that now on the webpage that, thanks to T, looks beautiful and has up-to-date information about how much they cost, because it's not always apparent just by visiting the website what it's going to cost and how that varies depending on how many tests you have. So school districts can plan, and there's a variety of funding models. Oftentimes it's paid for by the district. Sometimes it's self-funded by students and families.
So we have another question from Jan, and this is in relation to programs like College in the Schools and the SEALs. So Jan asked, I'm thinking about the complement of concurrent enrollment college courses that are in addition to the SEALs option. Are you encouraging students to do both? In College in the Schools, we've seen a large reduction in non-English language offerings, especially with the intermediate levels.
Interesting. I don't work in like a college in the schools kind of area so much, so I really don't have too much like interactions in terms of like whether like I'm encouraging more or not. But I remember there was a school who wanted to use the college in the schools. In a college in the schools, it's also different depending on which university it is, correct?
That's
and then
right.
and then they have an assessment that they were conducting. And then there was school that who wanted to use the assessment to be able to receive the bilingual SEALs assessment. And I think that's totally acceptable, because if it aligns with Octopus proficiency guidelines. I don't remember what happened at the end, but I think that both can exist together, coexisting. So that's really a benefit, right, for the students too, I believe. So if there's anything that can help to facilitate that way that I can, make connections to college in the schools programs in the state schools, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Thanks.
There's actually a follow-up question from Kathleen that is related to this, and this is sort of a loaded question, and Kendall will know why. But the question is, do Minnesota universities recognize the Global Seal of Biliteracy or the State Seal of Biliteracy even? But Kathleen's question is specific to the Global Seal, and she mentions that their district is exploring whether or not to offer that in addition to the regular Seal of Biliteracy.
And I can jump in really quickly and just say that was just in thinking about if there are languages that Minnesota doesn't have assessments for, is there sort of a parallel for whatever recognition students are getting for the Seal of Biliteracy? Is there a parallel version of that recognition if they're testing with or if they now have a possession of a different seal?
Yes, I think the Global Seal of Biliteracy is really parallel. And then if universities would recognize them, it's like, why not? If they would accept the bilingual, Minnesota bilingual seals, why not they would accept the global seal by literacy? I just haven't heard too many cases students actually earning the global seal of biliteracy. And then oftentimes at the college levels, I'm trying to learn about what really happens right after students graduate from high school, and then having the bilingual seals, they enter into the post-secondary institutions. Oftentimes, I just still don't know what exactly happens, and then part of my work is to be able to really understand, have a good grasp of understanding of what actually happens. I haven't heard a lot about it, but I think it's certainly an option for students and languages that we really don't have an assessment for. And quite frankly, colleges can do anything they want with it. They can decide to accept for credit for however they want to honor that, right? So I always talk to participants at the webinars or students and families that you should really advocate for yourself and then show it to them and talk to them and ask them about how they would honor, recognize their linguistic skills that they bring with. So I think there's that part going into there too. Does that help answer your question?
I'll just add that I think, as Kate was suggesting, the guidelines that Ayumi put up about the number of semesters, those are sort of rough estimates. It varies by university and colleges. Some are on trimesters, for instance. And of course, as many of us know, the University of Minnesota, of course, right now does not accept the seal. So there are productive conversations around that right now. I'm hopeful there might be some change, but it's not all Minnesotan colleges and universities yet.
When, excuse me, when you do your national needs analysis, will you be looking at that question of whether or not states, the universities in the states that you're looking at, accept seals for credit, or is that too far out of the scope of what you're planning to do?
It's actually quite rare. We kind of have that data. Kristen Davin and some of her colleagues have done a good job collecting that data. We have a sense of that. What we see as the bigger challenge is the rules for assessment, and the state legislation can vary significantly. So we're trying to imagine, like, what sorts of materials can we make that would be useful to colleagues in different states and provide some specific information without being overly specific. One avenue that we're really excited about that has been on our to-do list for a while is to expand our website to include an information for employers page. We think that's an area of growth and something that could also be of national scope to help employers, big companies like Wells Fargo and national companies understand that states in many cases are doing part of the employment screening for them. They don't have to assess for language. They can rely on the bilingual seal or the biliteracy seal and incorporate that. I would love to see that incorporated into job descriptions and job requirements and kind of a regular part of Job Monster and all the online ways in which people apply. I think that will also grow interest if it's seen as something which bumps you up or helps you in the job market.
Okay, so there's one last question also from Kathleen about ELs. And so this is, here's the question. How are current or former students who have been labeled English learners expected to demonstrate English proficiency? Starting in 2024, and I think Kathleen's talking about the context of Oregon, all students must demonstrate proficiency in all the languages they're submitting, meaning that all languages on the seal must be assessed in all existing domains. English won't be a default given. Yeah.
Okay, same. Yumi, why don't you answer that?
Yeah, so instead of Minnesota, for students to demonstrate the proficiency in English is met through meeting all required English language art credit for high school graduation. So there's no test or assessment that students take to demonstrate English proficiency.
So it's just
So
the
they have
English
to meet all the English language arts credit for high school graduation.
language.
Well, thanks again to Kendall, Ayumi, and T for this really great presentation and all the fantastic resources that you've created. And thanks to everybody for coming today. We hope that we will see you at another CARLA event later this semester. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.